This is Show Up as a Leader, a show from People Forward Network, helping you maximize your positive impact on the world by becoming your best, fully authentic self.
Hey everybody, it's Rosie. I am just telling you right now, get ready to just strap in. You're about to go for a ride, a whirlwind of incredible information and data, incredible practical application that came out of my conversation with Don Barden. He is a classically trained economist who got his MBA in global technology management and international business. So he's this finance techie person, but he has a new book that's coming out called Here Come the Girls. And we have this fascinating conversation from 3 years of analyzing data globally that he found about leadership. And this conversation is applicable whether you identify as male or female, but he did find some really profound difference that the numbers don't lie. And I don't know another research study that has been done at this level. And what they've learned from these female leaders that the data supports 3-to-1 outperform their male counterparts when everything else is equal. It's not about the gender. It's about very ingrained practices. And they pinpointed it to one specific area around problem solving. I'm not going to give it all away. You got to listen for it, but is where the fork in the road has a difference. And we can learn from that. And everybody can build the skills and level up to go about it in a different way. He talks about 3 key steps that women take in these critical problem-solving areas that have them be effective, that we can all learn from. He says this is not a male or female thing. It is a truth thing. And he has just so many areas rich, full of insights and information that you can practically apply. So you're going to want to have a notepad, or you're probably going to want to go back and listen to this one more than once. I just think there's so many wonderful, rich nuggets in here, very tactical things that we can all start applying right away to level up our leadership and be future ready for what is coming and what our world needs. Don, I am really excited to have this conversation with you on multiple levels, but also, although all of our content is evergreen, this is appropriately coming out during Women's History Month. So just thank you for being here and having this jam session with me today.
Oh, and thank you, Rosie. I appreciate it. I love your work. I love your podcast. I love everything you're doing. But most importantly, this whole concept of show up as a leader. And that's huge. 90% of this is just showing up, right? So I think you got it right with the title, so everything else is just going to be awesome. So thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for that. I love it. Love Fest right off the bat. So I'm just going to jump right in. So we're going to talk a lot about this, but your new book just came out as we're recording this, called Here Come the Girls, which I have to tell you, I just love right off the bat that you say it's a culmination of 3 years of doctoral research spanning the globe. One of our core values as a company is that sound science is your friend. And I think as a fellow PhD, there's so much snake oil and just, stuff out there. So I love it that we're going to get in, and this is rooted in good, data, you guys. So just everyone's listening, here we go. And so with that, you write at some point, I don't remember what page, sorry, but I quoted this, that this book is a powerful call to action for individuals, organizations, and policymakers to champion women's rights and advance gender equity in leadership positions worldwide. You're a dude. You identify as a dude. So why are you studying women's leadership? Let's just start there.
Yeah, that's a great question. I get asked that question all the time, and I love it. And I get asked very bluntly. Some people kind of go around it. They don't know how to say it. But I think the obvious question is, why is a middle-aged white guy, studying women in leadership? What is it? And I tell people, because it's not a male or female thing. It's a truth thing. And as you go through the study, you realize that this isn't a girl thing at all. It's just something girls do, which means we can teach everybody in leadership these incredible traits. But as you know, as a fellow scientist, science is it starts with observation, right? And then you just say, I want to ask a question. And then if that question is worthy of academic exploration, you go for it. And you go for it within a certain construct, so that when you look back at it, you've done everything you can to minimize bias and create a structure that gives you a yes or no answer to your hypothesis. But what's interesting, what a lot of people don't think about in science, is that no is a perfectly good answer. If we had done this study and it turned out the other way, no, it doesn't work, it's not good, that's awesome, because now we know, don't do that, right? But this, we kind of knew going into it that it was going to have some great results, and it was really phenomenological. It was just something that was amazing, and I'm honored to be a part of it. So thank you for recognizing it.
Yeah, well, so let's start. So what were you studying? Like, what was the research question? What were you trying to find out that you spent 3 years gathering and analyzing data to learn?
Yeah, yeah, no, the research question. Wow, you're really going deep quick, aren't you? I mean, the research. Wow, you're throwing all the old PhD stuff. You know what PhD stands for, right? Piled high and deep. So it's okay. You got to go. No, but great question, and thank you for doing that. It really started back with the power of observation. I spent the first 25 years of my career on Wall Street and traveling all over the world, and I knew that education was really the key to success. And education is what you make of it. You don't have to be Ivy League. You don't do anything. It's just what are you going to do with it, and what are you going to make it for yourself? And I tell leadership people this all the time. You never, ever, ever, great leaders never want to be the smartest person in the room. You want to be in a room where everybody's getting smarter together. So that's kind of always been my mindset, is to look at things, have observations around it, and say, hey, if we really work together on this, what can we learn? And does this help us advance anything? So I've kind of spent my career asking questions and not being afraid for a yes or no answer. I think it's just human. It's just life. So about 5 or 6 years ago, through observation, I started noticing that there were an enormous amount of extraordinarily talented people coming up in leadership that didn't fit the prior patriarchal mode. And I'm not knocking it. I always tell people this is not an anti-male study. This is actually a pro-male and a pro-female, and this is good. But we started noticing that, wow, there's sure a lot of women in areas that they didn't used to be in. And it wasn't a good or bad thing. It was just an observation. And then I started looking at it and thinking, wow, of all the people I work with, who are the best? Which companies are human centric, that are leaning in, that are continuing to grow, that just have this vibe about them that magnetizes the universe toward them? And then I started looking around going, holy cow, every one of these, or at least the vast majority of them, are run by women. So I'm saying to myself, okay, I'm looking around, there sure are a lot of women around here. And then I said, well, wait a minute, how come they're outperforming the guys? And so I just started noodling with it, right? And just started thinking about 6 years ago that there's something happening here. So I put my econ hat on. So I'm an economist by trade. And I said, look, let's look at some of this data. And I started playing around with the data. And we realized just the math alone, not the qualitative side of it, the quality of the work, but just the math. We were able to look at it and say that in the year 2028, the tipping point is going to occur, and women will take over the vast majority of global leadership. And by that, I mean everything from the local deli to parliament is going to be dominated by women. It's just going to happen. As of today, in the year 2025, early 2025, it's at 42%. So it's almost there. The math is taking it in a certain way. But to get back to your question, once we realized that, we're like, wow, now we got to really think about this stuff. How do we get our heads around this thing? Because it's a true phenomenon, but it's backed by mathematics. And as you know, in science, you got to pick two paths. You either go mathematical, which is quantitative, quantity, you're looking at the quantity, or you can go qualitative, which is the phenomenon and what's the quality of the output. We're not going to worry about math. We just want to know, wow, this is really cool. Very, very rarely do both of them happen at the same time, except for this. This time it did. This time we had the math going, and we could just say, look, we can look at everything from population increases to change in construct around education to just better output, just everything changing, social structure, everything. So it's like, wow, that's where the term "here come the girls." You can see the population wave changing and moving toward this. But then the obvious question in science was the yes or no, the null hypothesis was, okay, if women are about to take over the world, has anybody asked the obvious question, although it's hard because nobody wants to talk about this? Are you any good at it? That's really the question. Are women any good at it? And it's not a good or bad thing. It's not a judgmental thing at all. It's just, okay, what's going to happen when this phenomenon occurs, when this tipping point happens? So we started looking at it, and that was really it. It was like, why? Why are women so good? Why does the math support this? Why do the consumers want it? Why does the workforce want it? Because again, it's so weird that everything started sort of simmering itself down to move in that direction. And we studied it. And we went to some really sharp people in this industry and said, hey, what do you think about this idea? And the only answer was academic. It has to be academic because it's so polarizing and it's so, I don't know, it can be taken and sort of adulterated in 1,000 different ways. And we didn't want that. So we basically looked at it and said, okay, if we can mathematically prove it, what does the phenomenon tell us? Are women any good at leadership? And the answer is a resounding yes. And not only are they good at it, they're great at it. Not only are they great at it, they're exceptional at it. And not only are they exceptional at it, we can look at the math and tell you right here, right now, if you take two like businesses and put them side by side in the same geographic area, same business, which means you can't put a New York style deli in Anchorage, Alaska and compare it to one in downtown Manhattan. That's not fair, right? So you got to look at two like-minded groups. And what we saw consistently was that an organization run by a woman, when compared to an organization run by the man, with all the variables being the same, the woman outproduces the guy 3-1.
Okay, we get it. We gotta say that again, right? There's a whole lot there. So with the math, okay, so for those of you that are listening that are not like research oriented because it hurts your head and you hear like the peanuts, wah 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 wah, right? Which I get. So let's just dial in. So okay, everybody. So you understand with research, if it's actually quality research, sound science is your friend because there's a lot of crap. Like case studies and stuff is by itself is not research. It's like anecdotal, right? So if we're gonna actually make some claims and you make some really bold claims that we're going to dig into. So you take you try to control for as many things as you can, right? All these extraneous variables that could be the cause, and you're looking at them side by side. And you just said the female led business compared to the male led business with everything else being controlled for, being equal, outperforms 3-1.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a mic drop. So like Beyonce's coming in my head. Who runs the world? Girls. No diss on men. But I'm like, hey.
Yeah, no. That's just the beginning, Rosie. So they outperform in revenue 3-1. And a lot of people come back and say, yeah, well, who cares about revenue? You got to have margin, you got to have profit. You go, okay. Her profits are 3-1 over it. Her workforce retention, and this is huge. This is probably the biggest thing out there that is one of those things that you look at, and a lot of people would skip over it, and thankfully we didn't. If you look at the workforce in North America today, it's really worldwide, but let's just keep it simple. North America, which is the United States and Canada, a little bit of Mexico, but let's leave Mexico out. Let's just look at the United States and Canada. The average worker in the workforce today is 39 years old, and that same worker changes jobs every 3 years. So workers now are in the mode of constantly changing jobs. That's a huge burden for companies right now. So if the average worker is changing jobs once every 3 years, and you look at a workforce, just simple math tells you that, if they're changing jobs every 3 years, that means 1/3 of your workforce quits every year. And that means over a 3-year period, your general workforce completely turns over. Huge burden for companies in training, talent acquisition, everything else that's going on, productivity. Then you look at the female-owned business. Hers isn't on an average 3 years. Hers is 6 years. In fact, the guys are actually dragging down the national average to 3 years. So a woman, not only is she outproducing and outprofiting a man 3-1, her retention of her employees is 2-1. So she's keeping employees twice as long. And here's the weird thing. If you just look at years 3 through 6, there are people out there that'll say, who cares? You want employees to quit because they lose their productivity. Not true. With a female-owned business, the productivity of the employee goes up in years 3, 4, 5, and 6. So we're looking at this going, oh, okay, now my head really is hurting. You're saying that she's making twice as much or 3 times as much. Her profits are equally as high, and her workforce stays twice as long. You got to go, well, wait a minute. Now what? There's got to be something else. So now you go to consumers and you ask consumers, hey, Coke or Pepsi, Red Bull or Monster, why do you choose this organization? And when we talk to consumers who are leaning heavily toward female-run businesses, who most of them did not know it was female-owned. They didn't care. They just liked the product. They talked about the culture of the organization, how they feel drawn to it. And that was clearly the response of female leadership. And then we go to the employees and say, how come you're working here twice as long? How come your productivity is going up? The same cultural answer that the consumer is saying they wanted is what the worker was saying that they wanted. And then you go back and you study the female leaders and you go, what are you doing? There's the answer. What she's doing to have 3 times productivity, okay, in the revenue, twice the production and the retention, and consumers are running to her, even though they don't know she's a her. They love the culture, they love the product. It all folds into her leadership style. So when we got done, it wasn't a question of this is sort of a gray area. It was black and white. Female leaders are better than guys when it comes to this type of culture, of buyer, of society, and everything we're in right now. So a lot of times in economics, we talk about a perfect storm or the Swiss cheese effect. When that happens, you look at it and go, oh crap, this is bad. It's like that suspenseful part of a movie where you just know it's going to be a rough ride. This is the opposite. We're looking at this going, holy crap. And this phenomenon is going to be so good. All ships are going to rise together. But most importantly, everybody's going to get smarter together, because when you look at what women do in leadership, which frankly, bluntly, is just better than men. Like I said, it's not a girl thing. It's just something girls do, which means everybody can do it. But when you combine that with the math and what's happening, women are going to take over full majority in the next 35 months, 34 months, something like that. And we don't have any evidence that it's not going to change for 50 to 75, maybe 80 to 100 years. So this run is coming up where the leadership, the workforce, and the consumer are all going to align. And that rarely happens in economics. So it's going to be a ride, I can promise you.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the rigor, and I also appreciate the economic lens, and I appreciate that you're like, it really isn't gender specific. And so we're going to dig into that. What is it that these female leaders are actually doing that is getting those results? Because men can learn from it too, right? And so I think it's what I love about this, and hence Show Up as a Leader, is it's really looking at what it's speaking to our work. I mean, our whole focus and everything we do about rehumanizing workplaces, but the fulcrum or the pivot or the conduit to have more human workplaces at its core, we call this the foundation of the house, is leaders. And we're all about future proofing leadership, because if we don't level up our ability to navigate change and disruption and to create more human workplaces, that's where we see things crumble. So I think there's a lot of synergy with our work. And I don't know if you are aware of this, Don, but we just wrapped up 5 years of analysis looking at leader coaching data and looking at leader interviews. And there's a lot of synergy with what you're finding of like, what is getting in people's way? And this is male or female. Like, so we have, there was no distinction, but I think a lot of what you found is what leaders are trying to get better at aligns with your work. So like what we found in our data of the areas where leaders are trying to grow, and they can't just do it themselves. There's something fundamentally getting in their way, which we call the faulty programs. But they're wanting to get better at communication and feedback, and specifically having growth feedback and being more curious and open and giving themselves and other people grace. They're wanting to be better at having boundaries. A lot of these things that are considered quote unquote soft skills, which I hate that word, and you talk about it in your book too. And I love that they've been more widely recognized now as like soft isn't soft like it's weak. It actually came from the military. They were trying to distinguish between like what was it, artillery based versus like human based. But now we're calling it what it is, which is power skills or essential skills, because they are so critical. And so I want to dive into that, because this is a little excerpt from your book. I know it's weird, I'm probably reading back to you, but you write two things. So speaking of that leadership style, which aligns with what we learned in our research, you said that their leadership style is often characterized by a blend of technical expertise, emotional intelligence, and a collaborative approach, qualities increasingly recognized as crucial for navigating the complex challenges of the modern world. And then later you talk about how female leaders often exhibit distinct characteristics that set them apart in the leadership arena. These qualities are not merely soft skills, but powerful tools that drive organizational success, foster innovation, and create more inclusive and productive work environments. So I just want to say that like everything you're saying, like, holy crap, our research just showed all that. And males and females, like they're trying to get better at these things because we kind of suck at it. And I think when our faulty program gets in our own way, even if we have good intentions, because women can suck at this too, like it's not a gender thing. It's stuff that we all have to work to get better at. So let's dig in and let's talk about then what are these leaders doing? In your research, it was mainly the female leaders, but we know men can be really good at this too. Like, what are the things that they're doing, and what are the things that we need to learn so that we actually can be effective and have these 3-to-1 profit margins and 2-to-1 retention? Like, what is it we need to be doing?
Brilliant. Thank you for jumping into that because very few people want to explore that because they don't want to know, honestly. And the answer is really simple. It's train, 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 then train again. And I've said this forever. Leaders are not born. When you hear people go, oh, that person's a born leader. No, they're not. In fact, when you say that, you're devaluing all the work that they put into their lives to get better. You don't become a brain surgeon or a plumber or an engineer just because you felt like it and you wanted to say that's what I am. If you're any good at it, you put considerable and intentional effort into being better. And that's what we're seeing in leadership. Leaders aren't born, they're trained. Now, there are some characteristics of some people that make them a little bit better at it if they're trained. If they're not trained, they're nothing. It doesn't matter. So, yeah, there are some weird little characteristics every now and then that pop up. Communication, a little bit of bravery that people don't have. There's some things, but when we looked at this, we said to ourselves, wow, like you said, it's not something that is just inherent to women. It's something they do. But in the science and the exploration of it, we stayed away from that gray. We stayed away from people going, oh, well, women are just more nurturing and they're more motherly. I'm like, well, you prove that. I don't know how you're going to prove it, but that's not the point of the study. We want to know what females who are in leadership, which there is some concept around that you've been trained, or you at least went to the school of hard knocks and were smart enough to figure it out. And you said, okay, this is where I am today, and I'm performing at a certain level. I look around at my peers who are equally trained, I hope, and I'm outperforming them. Okay, now what is it? What is it that makes them Tom Brady? What is it that makes them Serena Williams? What is it about them that makes them that level of elite performance in that leadership realm? And the obvious, when you look at them, is they're women. It's just, there's black and white. You can look at it and say the best and most productive people in leadership, if you lined up like an old row at the prison, where you're picking out who it is that did it. You look at it and go, oh my God, everybody we pick out that are top performers right now are women. So everybody wants to go back to that bias, but it's just not true. What we found was that what women did, and it's a combination of the way they're trained and the way women are wired. At the same time, society got to a point where it was screaming out for this trait and screaming out for this level of training and saying, look, what we need is this. And it just so happened that the women were standing there going, we got this. We're already there. We've already trained ourselves, and we've used some inherent things, some things that just wire us. But training doesn't start when you go to college. Training starts when you're little. And so we see all these things that women were trained to do as she was growing up, trained to do when she went to college, trained to do when she took those instincts of hers and started applying them to human interaction. And then she went out there and said, I got to be trained. I've got to learn how to be a better leader. So women go through the same routines as guys do. They just have a little bit of a different approach. And that approach boils down to how a woman approaches her team when it comes to critical thought. That's everything. And the critical thought is around problem solving. So if you've got a team who is in charge of solving problems and they have a method of doing it, that's where we found the split in the road between the males and the females. What we found was that the female leader had a completely different way of approaching her team when there was a problem and it needed critical thought than what a man did. And that one fork in the road changed the entire storyline of this study, because we were able to look at it and say, that's the divide. That's where it splits. Guys go that way, girls go that way. Most of the time, there's probably a 10% gray area in the middle. But statistically, when that happens, you're like, oh, wow, now we've got a phenomenon. Because at that point, that's when it splits. And that's really what we came up with. But we had to talk about how we got here. We had to talk about, the differences. We had to talk about the science behind it, because to the best of my knowledge, this is one of the first books ever that approached it from a pure science perspective, but used the human aspect. We were able to go back and say, okay, now through case studies and things, we can look at it. We know what she's doing differently, but let's look at it. And then you start seeing it. And then I warn you and your viewers, you can't unsee it. Once you start seeing what women are doing, you can't unsee it. And it's such a simple trick that if the guys started doing this, their ship would rise the same and they would be on the same thing. But guys are trained to do it differently. So men are going to have to unwind some training and accept that, hey, she's got it. I don't know how she got it, but she's got it figured out. I just need to do that. And if they do, they'll realize that it's not gender at all. It's just something that she knew how to do better than him at the time. The market, the workforce, and the economy was screaming for it. So you look at all that stuff and you say, yeah, everybody needs to pay attention to this, because there's going to be sectors that are going to jump 3x. And just, a little nerdiness here. I tell people this all the time. When I say that a woman outproduces the guy 3x, you got to really kind of start connecting dots here. Women are also great leaders because they want everybody to get smarter together. Women know that the future of business is not in mergers and acquisitions. The future of business is in collaboration. And so when you have human-centric businesses run by women collaborating with each other, I always tell basic student math here, you can't add or subtract percentages. Like if something costs $100 at the store and there's a sale and it's 50% off, great. It's going to be 50% off. If they run a sale the next day for another 50% off, you don't add those together and say it's free. No, it's 50% off of 50% off, right? So you can't. You can only multiply up and down. So think about this. In an economy that's run by women, which each of those businesses are growing 3x, and each of those businesses begin to collaborate with each other, whether it be supply chain, distribution, whatever businesses do. Businesses never stand alone, right? But when all these 3x businesses are collaborating together and they're all run by women, you don't add it, you multiply it. So we're about to go into an economy, thanks to this research, or thanks to knowing what women are doing differently. It's not 3x, it's 3x cubed, which is 9x. So we're going to see a 9x push in the economy just because of one step that women put in the process when it comes to their team and critical thinking around problem solving. That's it. If guys would just do that, they would grow 3x cubed, as well.
Well, God, there's so much in that. Like, again, like the numbers, holy moly, right? And a couple of things you said that I think are really important is in the work that we do, we talk a lot about whether you're male or female, there's unlearning and relearning that we have to do. And anytime we have to unlearn something and relearn something, it can be cringy and it can be vulnerable because there can be like, we're doing something wrong. Like, no, you did the best you can with what you knew, or that's what society expected at the time. Or, I mean, if you look at leadership books from 20 years ago, it's like, oh my God, please no, right? And what we keep saying is that how we're leading now with the different generations that are in the workplace, and just like you can fight it and you can kick and scream, or you can relearn leadership. But you fundamentally, there's so many people that have to relearn leadership. And we see this in every industry where someone's a really good individual contributor, they're really good at fill in the blank, and then they promote them to a leadership position. But it is an entirely different skill set, and it's not for everybody. And I do think that the old school kind of patriarchal command and control, do as I say, doesn't fly for most people because it actually bumps us up against our hard wiring to author our own journeys. And so there's rebellion and there's all that happens. But the other thing that I will say, and I would love your thoughts on this from what you learned in your data, as I think about so many of the women leaders and executives that we have the privilege of working with, when we're uncovering the faulty program that gets in their way, a lot of it is they've been resisting being who they are, or leaning on more of their, if you want to call it, feminine versus masculine energy. And because of the context of the world that was the old boys club, and you talk about this a bit in your book, that they have had to morph into an inauthentic version of themselves, and they'll call, like, you either have to be a bitch, right, to be taken seriously, or you get these labels, and you still see it a lot today. So I mean, you look at whether it's Sheryl Sandberg's work on LinkedIn or the gender inequity, like it's still very real that there is this inequity, and a woman can be assertive and say something and she's labeled as emotional or whiny or whatever, and a guy does it and like worse, and he's ignored, or he's just strong, or so there definitely is still this imbalance. But let's talk about what this is. So I love that you pinpointed it to, it's about how we go about problem solving, because Lord knows there's a whole bunch of problems that show up every single day, and they show up in business. So what is that distinction? What is it that women are doing that in that juncture of decision making and critical thinking around it is different than men? Like, what is that?
Sure. And I appreciate your lead up to that, because you're 100% right. Men are trained a certain way in social patriarchal systems. Women are trained a certain way in social patriarchal systems. We went back and looked at that without any judgment. And I beg people, and I'd love to come back to this because I want to answer your question first. Don't judge the past. Just don't. And there's a reason for that. I'll come back to it. But everybody's a product of the social construct of how we were raised and what we were told to do. And you're right. I love what you just said. There's a joke I heard during this study. Somebody said, what do you call an authentic, rich, powerful woman who's well educated and a great leader? Bitch. That's what society looks at. It goes, oh, well, she must be a real bitch.
I mean, look at all the hate that Taylor Swift gets and she's
Oh,
putting
yeah.
billions into the economy, whether you like her music or not. It is insane the amount of hate that or Beyonce or what, like powerful women that are breaking molds, breaking constructs and having success. The hate that goes on them is just amazing to me.
It is people who were stuck in the past, and honestly, they're mad. After I do a lecture or a talk, I could have 100 people come up to me in tears saying, thank you, this is what we're looking for. And then you have one person come up to me and just rip into me because she doesn't like the title that says girl. She thinks it's genderfying. And I'm like, it is genderfying. Girls are better than guys. I'm sorry. And I'm so freaking old these days. I can say girls. Everybody's a girl now to me. So I'm at the grandfather mode, right? So whatever. But I'm trying not to offend anybody, but I'm just trying to have open and honest conversation. And people do bring that past up, and we can come back to that. But let me address the question. So here's the deal. And I try to use this metaphor, which is mostly true because it happened this summer. If there's a problem, say a woman is in charge of a big manufacturing company and it's rocking, it's growing 3x over everybody else, her employees are retaining, everything's great. You go back and say, well, what is she doing differently than the exact same manufacturing company run by a guy who doesn't have all that stuff? And we saw it last fall, up and down the East Coast last fall. Very few people paid attention to this because thankfully it was very quick. But the dock workers at all the ports from Boston to Savannah, I think maybe even Jacksonville, went on strike. Most of the world didn't know it, thankfully, because it settled really quick. But a lot of people for a moment were put into a tailspin because they had cargo ships off the ports of Charleston full of supplies that weren't able to come in. So factories who deal in real-time supply were in trouble because they're thinking, if we don't have our supplies to make stuff, then this factory is going to shut down, which means we lay people off or furlough them. And yet we're looking out in the harbor and we can see it. It's right on that boat. We just can't get the boat in because the dock workers went on strike. So that's the setup. So what we saw happening there when we studied that was the people that were in charge of the company supply chain would go up to the boss, the male boss, and say, hey, we got a problem. Supplies are stuck out on that ship. They're out there. We can see them. But the dock workers are on strike. We can't get it to our trucks. And if we get them off the boat, get them on the trucks, it still takes a day to transport them to our factories. But if we don't get this done in the next 3 days, we're going to be in trouble. What almost all of the males did when they received that communication or that employee brought them the problem, all the males, honestly, they looked at it and said, okay, give me the phone. Let me fix it for you. And they just jumped into fix it mode. Because guys are wired to fix things. In fact, we're so wired to fix things that we will break something just so we can fix it. That's true. So guys will actually take that situation and say, okay, give me the phone. Let me get on it. This is important. I'll do it. That is a critical error that guys have been trained to do because two things just happen. One, you're not the expert in that. And now you're jumping in trying to be the Superman, the white knight, to save the day. But most importantly, what the guy just did was he neutered his employees. He basically said, I can do something that you can't. Give it to me. And in doing so, he is training his employees. Every time there's a problem, a big problem, you bring it to me. Huge mistake. Now, it might have worked in the past where it was a little bit more industrial, a little bit more agriculture. Some things needed to be done, and that boss might have risen up through the ranks. And I'm not saying they don't know what to do, but in most cases today, they just don't. But they're like, I can fix this thing. And I'm going to get on the phone, I'm going to call somebody. Nothing happened in that. Nothing. Nobody was successful. But then we looked at the female-owned businesses in the exact same scenario. And again, you cannot unsee this. When it started happening, the first thing that she did was she added 3 steps before she got to the fix-it mode. So the same employee comes up to her and says, oh, we got this problem. There's the dock workers on strike. Our ships are stuck out there. We can't get the cargo off the boat, onto the dock, onto the trucks to get it here. We got 3 days or we're screwed. What she did was she basically took a breath and she added 3 steps. Sympathy to the problem, empathy to the person, and then meet them in the middle. Those are the 3 steps. So the first thing she does is she separates the problem from the person. And she says, man, that's a real problem. I saw that on the news this morning. I'm sympathetic. That's a big deal. Those dock workers are on strike. They got their own problems, and we got our problems too. But it looks like a whole bunch of people are over there. The problem isn't here. The problem is there. And she's sympathetic to the problem. That's critical because the guy rarely separates the problem from the person. So she is allowing that person who brought the problem to realize that problem's not you. That problem's over there. And then she leans into that very same person and she shows empathy to the person. So sympathy to the problem and empathy to the person. She would literally say, hey, look, I know it's a big deal. We'll figure this thing out. Are you okay? I know you didn't cause that strike, but I know it's your responsibility here. I want you to breathe. We're going to tackle this thing, but you've got to be okay. Nothing's going to happen. So think about what she did. She separated the problem from the person, and then she leaned into the person and she showed them empathy. I get it. You're losing sleep over this. This is your career. Just breathe. You didn't have anything to do with it. We'll solve this together. But then the third step that she adds on, instead of just saying, give me the phone, I'll fix it, like the guys do, and this is so data driven, it's crazy. 98+% of the people who bring you the problems in leadership, this is something you need to know. 98% of the people know how to solve the problem. But when a leader goes, give it to me, they neuter them and they say, I don't care what you think, I can fix it and go on. What the female leader does, she shows sympathy to the problem, empathy to the person, and then she says, hey, wait a minute, before we jump into this, how would you do this if you had a magic wand? I mean, everybody's got their style, but she say, if you got a magic wand or something, how would you solve this problem? 98% of the time, if you just listen to them, they already know. And what happened in this was we saw people coming up and saying, well, honestly, I know people down there, and I think I can file for an emergency action, and I think I can call the leaders of the docks and the unions and work with them on some stuff. I got a few ideas, but I think I can get this thing done in 24 hours. Not solve the strike, get your stuff. And what the female leader does, instead of saying, oh, great idea, I'll think about it, like a guy does, and run with it, she says, do it. And then when she says, do it, she says, oh, by the way, we got 3 days, give yourself 48 hours. Don't kill yourself over this thing. Let it work itself through, solve the problem one step at a time. If you need me, come back to me, but I trust you. So think about this. Instead of just neutering the employee, taking away their responsibility, go fix it yourself, she says, look, that's a real problem. I'm sympathetic to the problem. I'm empathetic to you. Oh, by the way, you're the expert in this field. How would you solve it? Okay, great. Do it. And if you need me, come get me. She has so increased all levels of productivity at that single point. It's insane. Because what she's doing by showing sympathy to the problem, empathy to the person, and meeting them and saying, what did you do? What she's really saying is, I see you. I recognize as a problem. I hear you. I want to know that you're okay. But most importantly, I understand you because you're the person who knows how to do this. And I entrust you. I'm trusting you. You're entrusted and I'm trusting you. I see you. I hear you. I understand you. Now, when a recipient of that from leadership feels seen, heard, and understood, that's the formula for value. They feel valued. So now what she's done by saying, I see you, I hear you, I understand you, the employee feels valued. And then by saying, go do it, she's empowering them. And let me tell you, you have an empowered workforce that feels valued by your leadership or their leadership, it is an unstoppable force. And almost every one of those situations, it cleared itself up and it fixed itself. On the times where the guys got involved and said, I'm going to fix it myself, neutered their employees, took away the proper people and tried to fix it themselves because that's how they're trained, not because they're dumb. They're trained that way. 40% were successful, 60% failed on it, whereas 100% of hers failed. But here's the real key. That's the type of workforce you want because if they feel valued and empowered, they're not changing jobs every 3 years. In fact, as you're training them, they're increasing their productivity. So you see where these numbers come from?
Oh, 100%. Oh my God. And I love that very concrete example. And there's a few things that are coming up for me, Don. God, we could geek out about this forever, but I think this is so critical. Because again, I'm gonna draw a parallel to the research that we wrapped up. And what's so interesting is with leaders who are wanting to get better at delegating, leaders who are wanting to get better at growth feedback conversation, leaders who are wanting to get better at boundaries. When we start to look at the faulty programs that get in their way, a lot of it is a warped value, sense of value proposition, that my value comes from being the one to do it, having the answers, being the smart one, fixing it, being in control. So there's a lot of that kind, I call it head trash, that is at play. And what's so fascinating is that as we help these leaders, and male or female having this, but as we help leaders with this programming who want to jump in and fix it, because in their mind, that's how they show value. Like, I have to prove myself, I have to be productive, I have to be accomplished, so I have to be the one to do it. As we help them upgrade that faulty programming that keeps them behaving that way over and over, so it's the unlearning and relearning, they start to see that their value as a leader is not being the smartest one in the room, having the answers, jumping and fixing. It is calling other people to greatness and elevating them. And that's where you actually add greater value. We have to upgrade that faulty program for them to shift their own value proposition. And when you think about being, like, for us, when we talk about being future ready, and you talk about this as a training and a development solution, if you will. And I love that, because what we also say is that, you know, everybody in this disruptive environment that is only escalating in disruption, we need to actually equip everyone to be able to show up as a leader, not just formal leaders. And yes, formal leaders need to have additional skills because of the inflow, like you just talked about, but we need to level up everybody. So if I'm jumping in as a leader and doing the thinking for you, taking control, not including you, not only does it neuter them, to use your language, and deflating, but I'm actually thwarting your ability to level up and be ready to thrive in this environment. And then the other thing that comes up for me with that is just so critical is you also think about, you look at any of the data that's been done on like resilient organizations, and everyone intuitively knows this, that you need to include the people who are closest to the work. And how often do you have execs or whatever that go off and they create a solution? Here's a new system, here's a new protocol, here's a new fill in the blank, and they didn't include the people who actually do the work on a day in, day out basis. And you hear it all the time in organizations, and they're like, whose brainchild was this? Because you've got people, my guess is, with, again, male or female, but it's showing up in your work and predominantly male, that are having this mentality of like, I don't need to include other people. And again, it may not even be conscious. It's this subconscious programming from our like lived experiences. That's where this programming comes from, that has told us this is how we are safe, how we belong, how we are accepted, how we add value. And when that programming is hijacking, you get a very different way of showing up. So I love that, because I think it's common sense, but I love that you have the data and the concrete example behind it, and we can learn it. That's what I love. Like, our research, like, yes, I don't care what gender you are, you can upgrade this programming that has you do the first example that fails 60% of the time and start to show up with the 100% success that is cringy for a lot of people listening, but you can do it. It's not just a training thing. It's also a inner work upgrading thing that has to happen.
Absolutely. And you know what it is? And this is where men have a hard time with this, and I don't think women do. And we were trying to figure out how to way to verbalize this. And Dan Sullivan up in Toronto had a version of this early. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I think that actually applies better to here. You don't want to tell a leader to change their mind. It's not good to anybody to say, I need you to change your mind about anything, social, political, emotional, whatever. People are like, no. And then they're going to dig their heels in and not do it. What you want is the mindset of saying, I'm not going to change my mind. I'm not approaching the situation that way, but I'm willing to change the way I think about how I think about the way that I think about my thinking. In other words, am I approaching this the way I've always done it? Or is there a different way of approaching it now? That's not changing your mind. That's changing the way you think about your process. So if you go back to it and a guy is trained to just fix it, yes, he's neutered his employees. Yes, he's devalued them. Yes, he's not empowered them. And not all guys do this. I mean, there's some great organizations run by men who are great at this. But when you see these organizations out there and you see their employees changing jobs every 3 years because they're not empowered, they're not valued, so they're just going to go where the money is or go where their talents are, what happens is now that leadership has to go from innovation and creativity, which is what they should be doing, and back to talent acquisition and training and fighting, and they get stuck into a death spiral, into a loop that they can't get out of. Whereas those who are saying, look, I need to think differently about this. Instead of me fixing it, what if I empowered them to fix it? The question isn't, well, will they fix it better, faster, smarter? The real question is, oh, well, what am I going to do with my time? Now, in leadership, that you have a self-managed organization that's out there growing and doing things. What we found with her is when she has an empowered group of people who are valued, there's so many problems that happen in the future that she's never aware of because they fix it. They fix it themselves. And within that fixing the problem, they find opportunities. And they might come back up to leadership instead of sort of bitching and moaning about things or giving bad ideas. They're like, hey, you might not have known this, but a couple of weeks ago, there was a dock strike. We were able to work it out before we had to elevate it to you. It was great. But here's something that we saw. We saw this new thing. It's an idea worth pursuit. Leadership now takes that and goes out there and they're innovative. Or if something didn't come back from the workforce, now they're free to still be innovative and think about things. So you didn't get to a leadership role through just attrition. That's called management. Real leadership roles are there because you were trained and because you're willing to think differently about how you think about your thinking. And knowing that women are just better at it than guys, that's where we're seeing the jump.
Well, it's like that change of like what I'm hearing from you, Don, and tell me if this is accurate, but it's because I hear this a lot too. Well, what do I do with my time? And again, it goes back to that warped value proposition. But what I'm hearing is like when you actually build a more empowered, like basically equip everyone to show up as a leader in your workforce, then as a formal leader, you have the time that we hear all the time of working on the business versus being stuck in the business. And I don't care what industry, I don't care how long you've been in business, that every leader's challenge that is in a senior leader role that is charged with strategy, I hear it over and over and over, trying to find the time because they're putting out fires, et cetera, that they're not effectively strategizing. They're not devoting to that. They don't have the reflective time, the thinking time, because they feel like their calendar has to be jammed up. But what I'm hearing is that's the shift, right? It's now you are finally getting the time that you desperately need to work on the business versus in the business.
All day long. In fact, I tell CEOs this all the time. They come up and say, okay, what is my role as a CEO? Male or female, doesn't matter. What do I need to do? And I say on the first day of being a CEO, you need to make 3 critical decisions. Number 1, you need to decide and commit to protecting the brand at all costs. Your job is to protect and steward this organization. You're willing to do it at all costs. That's number 1. Number 2, you begin to think about choosing your probable successor, because great leaders build other great leaders up around them who can take over, because you just never know. You never know what's going to happen. And if you leave an organization without any leadership because you try to carry the whole thing, great. What responsibility is that? A whole lot of people are out of work right now because of you. So commit to protecting the brand and choose your successor. But the third thing, and this is what you were saying, I think you did it very, very beautifully, is the third thing all leaders need to decide is, am I going to be a leader or am I going to be in charge? Because you cannot do both. Being in charge is for managers. Leadership is about leading, guiding, creating the guardrails, being innovative, thinking differently about your thinking, empowering people, making more leaders so that you can steward the organization. And this is very critical. And it's mentioned in the book one time. In society and leadership, you get buzzwords, for a while. Servant leaders was a big thing. I'm a servant leader. I'm a servant leader. I'm a servant leader. I'm a servant leader. That is not the pinnacle of leadership. Every time I was looking at that, I was like, gosh, that's great. Everybody wants to be a servant leader. That's good. That's not the pinnacle. The real CEOs, the real executive leadership that's out there are not servant leaders. They're steward leaders, which means they recognize 2 things. 1, I'm here for a short period of time. And 2, I've been given the responsibility of stewarding this vessel and stewarding these people to get them to be the best they can be, to grow more leaders. And women have this thing in their training to say that I'm stewarding the organization by creating an empowered workforce who feel seen, heard, and understood, which means they're valued, which means I can get out of the way and I can get back to leading because they're in charge. They're the ones that are doing it. So great leadership is about making more leaders. And if you're always in there fixing it, if you're in charge, then you're not doing it. So recognizing that your job is to steward this ship, not be a servant leader, but steward the ship, then you get to this nirvana of leadership where you realize all stewards are servants, but not all servants are stewards. So do you want to lead or do you want to be in charge? Choose one, because you can't do both. And what we see women just inherently doing is they're leaders. And they have a bunch of great people who are in charge. And that combination creates a stewardship, which when you just accept it, means that it's an unstoppable workforce. So again, you go back and throw the math and realize that there's just going to be more women, and those women approach it this way, and those women have a happier, longer retention on their workforce. The consumers are in line. They're growing 3x together, which means you have to multiply it, which means it's 3x cubed. Okay, say I'm half wrong. So instead of growing 9x, it grows 4.5x. I think everybody's going to be pretty happy, but we're not wrong. So we know we're right about this.
Oh my God. Well, and I love the difference of, are you leading versus being in charge? And I also love that you make the distinction between steward leadership and servant leadership, because I know that with the clients we work with, as we are developing their formal people leaders, because we also develop their employees to show up as a leader and give core and common language, because we think it's super, super critical. But we talk about how one of your primary roles as a leader in this organization, and I don't care if you're a frontline supervisor in a warehouse or whatnot, or you're an executive, that every single one of you needs to be a steward of the culture, a steward of the values, a steward of the purpose. And what we see over and over, where there's disgruntledness amongst the troops, so to speak, is where they see lack of alignment, where formal leaders are not being stewards, and there is an accountability for them not to be a steward. And you talk about that retention and stuff, it's not helpful. And the other thing, when you talk about how, from your data, what you see of how the female leaders are approaching it differently and really leveling up other people's leadership and their leading versus being in charge, is everything you're talking about. If you look at the data and the research on just being a human being and our shared humanity, it is a core human need to feel like we're valued and like we're seen and heard and we matter. And so really what you're doing is you're aligning those core human needs. And I could like geek out with you forever, but we have to transition. We're gonna have to have you back for a part 2. Like, this is like so fascinating. So speaking of our data, obviously, like, part of all of this is I'm obsessed with normalizing the messiness of being human. And I love that you talk about this isn't good or bad. This is, we could have a whole other conversation around the context, but it's our upbringing, it's our training. And we create these programs in our head that create a narrative, because as human beings, we make sense of our experiences through storytelling and narratives in our head. And no matter how evolved we are, we get in our own way. Like, welcome to being human, people. So, Don, I would love to hear from you. We've talked a lot about data, but now we're going to talk about you. What is a self-limiting story that you still tell yourself sometimes? And when it shows up, how do you move beyond it so that you can show up as a leader in your life?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. And I know exactly what it is. It was the first leadership thing I learned, and boy, did I learn it the hard way. It was horrible. And somebody was very wise and told me this. And this is important. Let me, before I answer the question, it's so important to learn and to listen, because what people are doing, whether they mean to be a mentor or not, is they're getting you someplace faster than you would if you learned it yourself. That's why we teach algebra to kids. You can go out there and try to figure it out, or we can teach you and get you there faster so you can turn your innovative mind on and go out there and apply math or the wheel or fire. We know how to do that. So we're going to share it with everybody. The same is with leadership. If you have great mentors giving you these ideas, that's saving you in some cases a decade of your life and keeping you on track. So it's very, very important to listen to the small things here or there. Well, going back 40 years ago, when I had my first company, I was just getting started and going, I was trying to learn how to do it, failed miserably, just, went the corporate route and then came back on the entrepreneur and the academic route and was very, very successful at it, but I had to fail a few times. But I remember the first thing I learned in leadership, somebody told me I was miserable because I just couldn't get the people to work as hard as I worked and to be as passionate as me. And somebody told me, they said, you can't ask anybody to do anything for you if they're not willing to do anything for themselves. And that just resonated with me, that when you're looking at people on the team, there's a place for everybody, right? But that doesn't mean that you had to put everybody in a place. You got to put the right people in the right positions for success. And by doing stuff, if you have the right people, if you're hiring motivated people, if you hire people who want to learn, want to be trained, then get out of their way. Give them everything they need in training and mentoring, and let them be the best person they can be. But if they're not willing to do that, there's nothing on the planet you can do as a leader to make them do it. So I see a lot of leaders fail because they can't get people motivated and inspired, and it's not their fault. And it's not the fault of the people. It's just the way it is. So I think my first self-limiting thing, and every once in a while I remind myself of that, is, oh my, am I expecting this person to be as excited about this project as me when they're not excited about anything in their lives? This isn't the right place for them. In the past, I would have probably tried to hire them and train them and help them. And now I know that you got to hire the right people at the right time and the right fit. And you start, to me, I start there. But it haunts me. I still believe everybody's good.
Right. Yeah. You want the best for everyone, and it's hard to admit that like this just isn't the right fit. And no one wants to suck. It's hard, but it's like no one wants to be not successful. Like even if I'm not motivated, it doesn't feel good to like suck at something, right? So if you're not in the right position, right spot, then that just doesn't benefit anybody. So
Yeah, it's mindset.
yep. All right, you ready for quick questions?
Sure.
Okay. Fill in the blank. Living authentically is.
Just being honest, be human. And the older I get, the more I realize the wisdom that comes with it, not through just, oh, Solomon-like wisdom, but, you realize that we've all seen this movie a few times, and I have people ask me all the time about the current state of affairs. I'm like, I've seen this movie before. I've seen good and bad in humanity forever. And, I think that's it. Just, authenticity and all, it's just being honest and being human. And the older you get, the more you realize there's nothing new really out there. It's just how are we getting better together that's important. So I think authenticity is just being human, which means you accept the flaws, you accept everything, and you accept that after you've been around the rotation of the sun a few decades, you figure out that it's not as critical as you thought it was. Just be kind.
Yeah, love it. When the world is presenting an opening, but you don't feel like showing up as a leader, what do you do?
Oh, wow. It depends. Is it the right presentation? Is it the right opportunity, for you? What I've learned is there's 3 rules. Number 1, never fall in love with an asset. And that's kind of crazy, but like, what does that have to do with it? Well, a lot of people sometimes will look at an opportunity because they're so in love with this asset, the business or whatever. I tell people, don't make your decision based on that. You fall in love with people and with memories. You do not and dogs and cats, but you don't fall in love, you don't fall in love with an asset. It's just an asset. Number 2 is never be married to an outcome. And this goes back to the root, I think, of your question. There's this great opportunity. I don't want to do it. Well, there might be a reason why you don't want to do it. Don't force yourself to do something. And sometimes people will get stuck into a situation where they saw it was an opportunity and they're just hell bent on getting it done. Yet in the process of doing that, you realize that there were other opportunities that popped up that you should have gone to, and you didn't because you were married to that outcome. And then number 3 is the radical acceptance that there's always another deal. There's always another opportunity. So if you can approach a situation like that where the universe gives you an opportunity, you just don't feel like it. First of all, am I being lazy or I just don't feel like, what is it? Or is this something inside my head going, this isn't right? I always go back to those 2 questions, or those 3 questions. Is this an asset that I'm in love with? I should not be. Number 2, am I thinking about being married to an outcome? Maybe I shouldn't. And number 3, do I radically accept that if I pass on this, even though I might look back at it and go, man, that would have been fun, no regrets, but there's always another deal. There's always something else out there. So I don't beat myself up on that. But there's a process to remind yourself that just don't jump at every opportunity. If you don't feel like it, then there might be a reason other than just you're lazy.
It's the pausing that you talked about earlier. I love it. I love it. Take some breaths. All right. What is something people would be surprised to know about you?
Oh God, there's a lot of things. I'm a chicken farmer. That's a good one.
No way.
Yeah, I have chickens. Yeah. So I decided to do something radically different last year, and I was looking at buying a new home. So I'm like, I've never been a farmer before. No, this isn't Yellowstone I'm talking about. This is several acres, about an hour north of Atlanta. But yeah, I have a chicken farm and ducks and honeybees and everything. And I own a tractor, and it's pretty cool.
I love it. I love that. Oh, that's amazing. All right. What's your favorite go-to movie?
Oh gosh, I love science fiction because science fiction allows you to experience morality play without the reality of knowing about it. Like I won't watch movies that where bad things happen to kids or to people, or I'm like, "Ugh, I don't want to do that. I'm not involved in that. But to me, I love science fiction that's talking about a better tomorrow, but brings challenges of today into the storyline. But it's set in the future where you can dream about something bigger. So anything like that, I love. So Star Wars, Star Trek, anything like that. Morality plays set in space are nice for me because you can have the same interaction and wrestle the morality of it, but still be separate enough to sit back and learn from it.
The dudes in my house are all about Star Wars, so there we go. I get it. We have lightsabers all over the place. Okay, what is something you can't live without?
Energy drinks. I got 3 of them right here. Yeah, well, I don't know what it is.
I always say, the active ingredient in those is catnip. I'm always like, do you ever feel like batting that?
Oh, really?
Whenever people are drinking those, I'm like, do you suddenly feel like you have to bat in a ball of yarn?
Yeah, that's
Anyway,
right.
I love it.
Yeah. No, I drink a lot of energy drinks, and I don't think I need it. I just like it. So,
Well, there you go. All right. What is something in your ordinary daily life that makes your heart happy?
oh, fitness, my fitness routine. I try to be up every morning at 5 a.m. in the gym. I try to ride 10 to 20 miles a day on my Peloton, and then do a pretty serious routine of workouts. It takes me about an hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes, but I'm done by 6:40. I'm out, cleaned up, dressed, ready to go by 7:20 or 7:30. And that's something that nobody can take away from me. Robin Sharma is a great writer, wrote a book called The 5 a.m. Club. And I had lunch with him about a decade ago when he was just thinking about the concept. And he told me about it, and it literally changed my life. And I'm so happy because that's my private time. It gets my brain and my body going for the day, and nobody can take that away. And what I've learned, if you try to squeeze that in later in the day or at night, it may or may not happen, but you're robbing yourself of that. So that's my happy place.
Love it. And what are you grateful for right now?
Everything. Honestly, everything. I'm grateful for the good times, the hard times. I certainly hate it when there are people that are hurt and in trouble. I'm not grateful for that, but there's so much opportunity out there. It's such a great time to be alive. It's such a great place to be. I'm just grateful. And somebody asked me one time, they said, do you have any fears? And I said, yeah, I have 2. And I said, look, number 1 is my children aren't happy. That's my biggest fear. I just want to be happy. I don't care what they're doing. Just be happy. I know it's ebbs and flows. And everybody has good days and bad days, but live a happy existence and look for opportunities and just be grateful. That's number 1. And if they're not, then that hurts me. And then number 2 is I don't want to come to the end of my days and realize I was the same person the entire time. I don't think going around the earth 80 something times and doing it the same way year after year, having 83 identical years is considered a life. It's about growing and doing more. So I'm grateful for my kids. I'm grateful for the opportunity to wake up every day and continue that quest and not be the same person, but continue to grow mentally, physically, spiritually, everything, around it. So I'm always grateful for that.
I love that. I love that. All right. Last question. Don, if you could challenge leaders everywhere to practice this one behavior that would create more human workplaces and equip everyone to show up as a leader, everything we've been talking about today, what would that behavior be?
Wow. I would say just consider, 'cause you can't tell leaders what to do. They need to consider it and get there on their own. Consider the concept about changing the way you think, about how you think, about the way you think about your thinking. That, I think, is critical. And that's what we did notice in the book and then study, that women tend to do better. That if a woman sees that there's a better fork in the road, if a woman sees there's a better way of thinking about it, she's pretty quick, to do it. Guys have to kind of get beat up a few times, and keep doing it the same way. And I think that's a leadership principle that women, I don't know if they're inherent, I don't know if it's part of social construct, I don't know what it is, but I think that's the biggest thing. And on that thing, consider thinking differently about how you think about the way you think about your thinking. I did a lecture the other day, and I've actually added this into several communications I do. Somebody asked me in this study, did I ever get emotional, about it? And I'm like, I'm not really an emotional guy, but yeah, there were some parts of this study that really opened my eyes to things I didn't see. And the biggest part of that was the power of the single mom. That if you see a single mom out there doing what she has to do to raise kids, sometimes 2, 3, 4 kids, working 1 or 2 jobs, that is a human being who is unstoppable. And I heard somebody say it's hard to be a single mom. And I looked at it and I said, no, it's not. I just studied that. Now, I have no point of reference. I'm a guy. I'm not a single mom. But I can tell you it's not hard being a single mom. It's impossible to be a single mom. Yeah, these women get up every day and do the impossible. Now, as a guy, I can do really, really hard things. I don't know if I can do impossible things, but these women can do it. And I saw something, I did it, and somebody sent me a text or something. I think it was on LinkedIn or whatever. I don't even know the person, but they said, I've always said that if you give me a team of single moms, I can change the world. And I thought about that, and I thought, wow, that's a perfect example of changing the way you think about how you think about the way you think about your thinking, right? There's a whole inventory of people out there who are freaking awesome, and they can do anything. What if they felt valued and empowered? Man, now you're talking. So, that I don't know, I just think that's a cool thing that, leaders should learn. Change the way you think about how you think about the way you think about your thinking. It happens every day.
I love it. I love it. Well, Don, we could go on forever, but thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure. Thank you for the work you do, and thank you for putting data behind it and helping us see, again, whether everyone's listening, whether you're male or female or whatever gender you identify as, it doesn't matter. There's things that we can do to be more effective. And I love that you have all the data behind it, which is like also like affirming for the work that we're doing. Cause it's like, yep, I mean, this is where the world is headed. And so I'm just very, very appreciative to have the data behind the work. So just thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for what you're doing. Again, this is part of changing the way you think about the way you think about your thinking, right? This is part of training. Education is not old classrooms anymore. Education is listening to podcasts, constantly, growing, and then sharing the podcast. I've already told like a dozen people about your podcast and said, you need to go listen to this. Yeah, because think about that. Now everybody's getting smarter together. That's the whole key to this. So what the women taught us in the book, and it's available on Amazon if anybody wants to go, check it out. I think as of now, it's still #1 in economics worldwide, and it's a top 5 release. So I remind myself of that, changing the way I think about how I think about my thinking. When people don't like that it says girls, or they don't like the concept, I'm like, okay, well, we'll see you on the other side. I'm cheering for you, but we'll see you, because I think women are about to change everything. And if people think 2028 is a long way away, yeah, no, it's less than 3 years. So it's coming fast, and it's going to be fun. But thank you for what you're doing. Thank you, thank you, thank you, because you're helping everybody get smarter together.
I'm Rosie Ward, and this is Show Up as a Leader. To learn more, head over to peopleforwardnetwork.com and, of course, hit that follow button.